and welcome to this week's YouTube video. Today I'm going to show you how I painted this horse. So before we start painting, just a word about the reference photo, which I can't show you as it was a commission, but I just wanted to show you how different it was to the image I painted. Because I will talk about this later, the importance of not getting lost in detail. So with a bit of help from Procreate, I'm just going to draw over the top of this image. The horse was actually in its stables, just like this. But in order to create something that would translate better as a painting, I needed to change it quite dramatically. But I will talk about this later in the video. So let's start painting then. This painting has been done in 4 sittings. I will show you a photo of the painting after every sitting. So I'll do my paintings usually over about 4 days. This video has been edited down though to 1 hour. I don't have a camera on my palette, so I've edited out the painting mixing, but I will tell you about the colours used when I get to layers 2 and 4. I will try and speak for as long as I can throughout this video, but sometimes I may go silent as it's actually quite hard to keep talking non-stop for 1 hour. But please follow along with the painting if you can, and you can find the colours and mediums I've used in this painting in the video description box below. So the first layer then, this is actually usually a very quick layer. It doesn't take me very long to do these, some of these layers. Don't be thinking because it takes me, I do it in 4 layers, that each layer is the same length of time. Generally layers 1 and 2 are very, very swift. It's layer 3 where I do all my work really, and it's the longest layer. Layer 4 tends to be a fixing layer, so that can be quite quick as well. So then this is the first layer. So I'm using a mix of gamsol with some raw umber, and sometimes I do mix in a little bit of white paint as well. I'm using zinc titanium white by Gamblin, but you can just use standard titanium white. I like the zinc titanium white because it has more transparency about it, but it is really what you prefer. But I'm using the gamsol to thin my paint really, and I'm just trying to get all my areas in and trying to set out my values really as easily as I can. I'm not trying to paint an exact monochrome reproduction of what you'd see if you turn the image into black and white. I'm just really trying to paint something that gives me an indication of what my values are, which will then help me as I go along. And I want this layer to be really loose. I don't want it to be tight. And I don't really want to get lost in the detail. I'm just trying to get a sense of it at this stage, that it's really a template for when I get further into the painting. I'm shifting between different brushes, so I'm using some round brushes for smaller areas, a bit of detail, sort of mainly around the eyes and perhaps the nose as well. And for everywhere else, I'm using a flat brush just to get it on. I'm thinning my paint very heavily with gamsol, and I'm using the gamsol to really act as a way to lighten my paint at this stage. I'm not adding any white. I'm just adding more and more gamsol to make it really, really thin. You'll probably find that the tighter you're underpainting, the tighter your overpainting will be. So you really must not worry about, at this stage, it looking a bit of a mess, it not looking, that realistic. You're just concentrating on getting everything in the right place, getting a suggestion of what you think your values are. And you don't want your paint to be too thick, because I find, especially on paper, I find that the thicker your paint, the more it's going to mute the layer that you put on top of it. So I want to keep my paint as fresh as possible. So I'm keeping these first two layers very, very thin and reserving my thicker paint for my third layer. So even if I'm looking at something and I'm thinking, well, that is really very, very dark, and I'm laying my very dark areas with my raw umber, I'm still thinning it. I'm not using it almost out of the tube to create as dark a version of that tone as I can. I still want transparency to it, because I just want to arrive at my layer 3 with as little paint as possible on there, but giving me the maximum amount of information that I can get. So I'm actually adding a bit of white now, but I've really, really terped that down as well, because sometimes you can't get it light enough with the gamsol. So I am adding a little bit of white where I need to. So I usually reckon this layer will probably take me about 20-25 minutes-ish. It never takes me very long to get a bit of paint on there as quickly as I can. And then I just leave it to dry, and then I'll have a look at it the next day. So remember then that we are painting shapes. We are seeing everything in terms of shapes. You have to forget that you are looking at an image of a horse and see the horse purely in terms of its shape. This becomes really important as we start adding colour, because often you can think, oh, it's a brown horse, I need to use brown, and it can actually restrict you. Whereas if you focus on painting the shapes rather than what you think you're painting, it's actually a lot easier. So that's the first layer then. I'll just show you a photograph of that layer all done so that if you want to pause the video and have a closer look at it, that's fine. And then we'll get on to layer 2. The second layer then, so I wanted to talk briefly about colour and the mixes I used for this horse. So I'm going to show you the colour wheel. If you have watched any of my other videos, you'll know that I talk about painting in neutrals using either complementary colours, which are colour opposites, or split complementaries, which are the colours either side of a direct opposite. For this horse painting, I am controlling my colour shifts between warms and cools with the following. To my standard brown, which is raw umber, this is the only brown I have in my palette, I am adding red or yellow to warm it up, or perhaps a combination of the two, so that would be orange. For my cool colours, I am adding a blue to my brown. But I am also mixing other cool colours into my browns using my red and my yellow. So for example, I am adding green into my brown and also purple into my brown because I'm using a combination of yellow plus blue for the green and red plus blue for the purple. So let's get back to the painting then and see how that affects what we're looking at. So I've started very thinly adding the paint. I'm still using my gamsol to thin the paint at this stage. It's really not thick. My intention for this layer is to get some paint on it, really, some colour. So it then gives me a bit of an idea as to what I'm doing when I move on to my third layer, because I find it much easier to try and paint on top of something when I have something underneath. Even if it is something really quite messy, I find it very hard to go from zero to what I'm looking at really in one go. Which is why the alla prima method doesn't really work for me. But it's a very good method if you can use it, and it will give you very fresh paintings. But like I say, I'm not great at that method. I find it very hard. I find it very daunting starting with nothing. And I just have to build up to it slowly. So that's what I'm doing on this layer. This layer really, it doesn't take me very long. It's probably another maybe half an hour layer. And then once I've done it, I just put it to the side and then I have another go at it the next day. So in total, really, the first 2 layers you're looking at no more than an hour. But don't forget also that I have been painting for quite a long time. So it's not a hard, fast rule. If you're deciding that you want to have a go at this method of painting, don't feel you've got to do it in like 25 minutes or half an hour. You know, it takes you as long as it takes you, but the most important thing is that you shouldn't be going into detail. You should just be laying the paint very, very quickly, resisting that urge to get bogged down in the detail, and you can save that all for your third layer. And I'm still using my flat brushes here because I just want to get the paint on quickly, and I find them very expressive. And I'm not really worrying about them lifting up any paint because I'm literally just adding paint to a section and then moving on to the next section. I'm not worrying too much about it being super, super correct. I'm being quite limiting as well with my white. I don't like to add too much white to anything at this stage. So if I can get away with not using my white and maybe thinning the paint enough to lighten it, then I will. I mean, I will use the white if I really, really need to, but I try to avoid using white at this stage because obviously white, it does tend to knock out my colour, and I want to keep my painting as fresh as I possibly can. I'm also working with 2 photographs at this stage. So I've got one in colour and I've got one in black and white. So I find this a very useful way to work because I'm actually splitting up part of the process. I can look at my black and white picture to tell me what my tonal values are, and then I can look at my colour picture to tell me what colour or what hue or, you know, what temperature I need to adjust my paint mix by. And I find this much easier than trying to work with just one photograph where I'm trying to figure out the value and the colour at the same time. You can just adjust your photographs on your phone. Very often your phone has an application in the photo section, and I just do it on my phone. I just turn my image into black and white on my phone. It's very easy to do. So you can see very clearly on this application of colour that I am adding very obvious warm and cool areas of colour. So I've got much warmer colours on nearer down the nose, and in the centre around the eye it's much cooler. So I'm adding my blues and my cadmium reds to my mix here, and also my greens. So I'm making yellow and blue or red and blue, and I'm adding that directly to my brown to cool it down. I'm then adding my red and my orange to my brown to warm it up, and maybe a little bit of white if need be. But I'm making it much easier for myself so that I can clearly see those colour shifts when I start onto my third layer. And that is pretty much the second layer done. So I will now show you a photo of it, just so if you want to pause and have a good look at it. So there we go. Okay then, so the third layer. So this is where all the work is done really. I'm not using gamsol to thin my paints anymore. I'm using linseed oil. I use a little bit of Winsor & Newton refined linseed oil, but if you want to try something like liquid, that works just as well. I just don't like it because I find it ruins my brushes very quickly, so I prefer linseed oil, but you can use liquid. So I've kind of set myself a template in my last few layers. So now I'm using that, but I'm being much more pronounced with what I'm doing. I'm trying to get much more of a realistic lightness on this layer. Something that I would say maybe is about 70% done. So if you remember in the introduction to this video, I briefly showed you what the horse looked like before I adjusted the reference photo to paint. So the reason why it is important that you look at your reference photos before you start painting is because ultimately, what we want to try and aim to paint and capture is the essence of what we're looking at. And very often, it's easy to get lost in the detail. And so painting an orange stable, making sure I got the light right on the railings that were going down beside the horse's nose, that doesn't really help add essence to what I'm trying to show in my painting. I am trying to get my viewer to have some kind of connection with my subject matter. And if my subject matter is surrounded by stuff that doesn't really aid the message that I'm trying to say, it's just going to distract. So what you'll end up with is a painting that maybe is very accurate to the original photo, but it doesn't really give you the essence of that animal or the essence of that object. So when you sit down to paint something, it doesn't really matter what you're trying to paint. So for example, in this case, it's a horse, it's an animal, but you might be trying to paint something plein air, or you might be sitting down to paint a still life, or it might be another person. But everything that you paint, you have to ask yourself, what is the essence of that object? Because if you're self-directing and you're getting to choose what you want to paint rather than, say, a commission piece, which is a different video really. If we're talking mainly about self-directed work, something that you've selected, you will have selected that for a reason. So maybe it's the fact that the animal just has a really lovely expression on its face, or maybe the animal is looking wistfully into the distance, or maybe it's the fact that the still life that you're painting, you love flowers, or you love the colour of the objects or the shine on the objects. Or if you're painting plein air, maybe it's the light that you are captivated by. Maybe it's the drama in the sky, but whatever it is, that is what you need to show. That is the essence, the reason that you are painting it, and that is what you have to show. And if you get caught up in trying to just paint the detail, you'll end up with a picture that represents the view or the object or the animal of what you were looking at, but it won't capture the essence. And so what you see is very important, and trying not to just see the detail is how you need to try and look at pictures. So for example then, in this picture, the essence to me, once I'd removed the stable and everything, I was left with a horse that was gazing at something. I don't know what it was, but I was left with a strong profile of a horse. So in order to maximize that profile, that strongest line which runs diagonally from the top left to the bottom right, I had to do everything that I could to enhance that. So I had to put my lightest areas on that side. I had to put my warmest areas on that side. And then behind the horse, I didn't want to carry the warmth because I didn't want you to look at it. So I had to make sure that my area behind the horse was much cooler than the area in front of the horse, because warm colours automatically sort of come to the front and cool colours recede. So it's just understanding these little rules that can help you make these decisions to try and reinforce the message, and to then help the viewer connect and see what you are seeing, because ultimately that's all I ever do. I just paint what I see, and sometimes I have to adjust the photos to give the viewer a little bit more of a clue of how I see it, because it's very difficult if you've got a horse surrounded by a stable, and it's just not going to give you the same effect if you've got that strong profile, because we've got very dark against very light. I'm still using my flat brushes as well. What I'm really doing is I'm starting with really the most obvious areas, I think, and then I'm kind of bridging across to the areas which I'm not quite so sure about. So painting any animal that is brown is very, very tricky. It really is very tricky, because very often if you were to turn the image of that animal into black and white, you would have very limited values. They would be so close together. So really, the form of that animal is controlled by the temperature shifts across its fur. So here, it's really important that I control those shifts between warm and cool. And I've avoided using black really anywhere on the actual fur itself. I am purely controlling it with using either a cool purple, which is my cad red plus my ultramarine deep, or if I want it more of a green as well, I'm using ultramarine deep plus yellow ochre light. And then for my warmer areas, I'm just either mixing straight into the brown, either the yellow ochre light, or I might mix up a bit of an orange with my cad red and my yellow ochre light. And I'm mixing these into my browns into varying degrees. It's not like a 50-50 split. I will mix them separately and then I will add. And because it is so hard looking at an animal that is all one colour, we have to make it easy for ourselves. So the simplest way is to control these colour shifts with your 3 primaries. And that's exactly what I've done, adding them to my brown. I look at my reference photo and I paint an area and I say to myself, now, is that area more yellow, more red, or more blue? And to the mix that I have on my palette, and I just mix in what I think it is. I then dab a bit on my painting. I see how it looks and I think, well, no, that looks about right. And so I paint that section and then I move to the next section and I say to myself, right, now is this more red, more yellow, or more blue than the section that I have just painted? Now, it might be more red or it might be more sort of orange. So then you can start to get a little bit more specific and you can say, well, you know, red is too strong. Maybe it's a bit more orange. So I'll add orange into my mix that I've just used and I'll see what that looks like. And so you are constantly adjusting the colours on your palette. You're not mixing everything independently and in isolation of each other. It's like this enormous pot of colour that just sort of spreads out on your palette, that you've got all like mini colours going on within one big piece of colour, and it kind of allows you to have a much more harmonious painting because everything is in relation to what was next to it or what was above it or what was below it. And I found it to be a way that works really, really well to giving you that harmony of colour in your painting, and also much more realistic colours, which, you know, somebody can paint something and they can get the value right, but their colour is off because it's just too saturated. So, you know, you really need to be mixing these colours into your paint. You should never use it straight out of the tube because colour just isn't like that in real life. It's not like that at all. And sometimes, as well, as I'm painting along and I need to check as I'm going along whether I'm correct or not, I will stop and I will take a photo of my painting as it currently is, and I will turn it into black and white on my phone, and I will check it against the black and white photo that I have to see if there are any values that are glaringly wrong to me. Because there are some little hacks that you can do to check as you're going along that you are correct. I mean, we have this technology, we may as well use it to our benefit. And using the linseed oil as well, it really helps keep my edges soft, because I've already identified that I want that hard line down the diagonal of that horse's nose, that top bit against the very light, because that's my maximum area of contrast. So that's what I want to keep really as a hard line. But in terms of the shading and the different values that fall across the horse's face, I want to keep these as soft as possible, because the edges just would not be hard. So I find that using a little bit of linseed oil keeps my paint flowing really nicely. You don't want to use too much, because at this point you don't want to be losing control of your painting, but you really do need to, especially with something like this, I find that you need to cover pretty much all of your areas with paint to allow yourself to pull it around. I mean, that's not always the case. I don't always do that. So every painting is different and you have to assess as you're going along. But for this painting, I needed to cover every area of paint on the horse, not necessarily in the background, but on the horse, to enable me to pull and push that paint around to give me that lovely, soft, glossy effect that you see as the light hits the different areas of the horse. And remember as well, we are painting shape. We're not painting a horse. We're painting shape. So it doesn't matter that perhaps you've not painted a horse before, or you don't paint horses very often. I really don't paint horses very often, but I approach everything in the same manner. I'm painting shape, I'm creating value, I'm softening edges, I'm hardening edges. Everything is the same process. So it doesn't matter what you're painting, because if you approach it thinking, well, I'm just painting shape, everything is made up of shapes, it makes it a lot easier. You don't suddenly get daunted feeling, oh no, I don't paint horses very often, I'm not very good at painting horses, I don't know the bone structure. I'm sticking mainly with flat brushes for this painting, because I find that the flat brushes, especially because of their shape, really helps create the bone structure of the horse. Really, just by laying sort of flat, long shapes, strokes, it really helps to reinforce the effect you get of horse's fur. I use my round brushes for the detail. The small brushes only really come out around the eye, to be honest with you. For everything else, I might probably, like even the nose, I'd probably just use maybe a small flat brush. But for the detail around the eye, I will use I'll get my little brushes out. I am adding black into the areas of the horse's mane, but I am warming that black up with cad red. I mean, cadmium red is a really great red because it's quite an orangey red, and I find because of this you can pretty much add it to any dark colour and it really does warm it up. And if you add it to ultramarine deep, it almost gives you a little bit like a brown. So it's a really great red to have as your standard red in your paint box. So that is pretty much the third layer done. I then sort of stop where I think I can't really do much more to it, and I'll leave it and then finish it off the next day. So here's a photo then of the third layer. So if you want to stop it, you can and have a look at it. So the last layer then. So I use this layer usually as a bit of a fixing layer to go in and fix the areas that I think are off or that I haven't done properly, or it's not as long as the third layer usually. Sometimes though, in my third layer, I mess it up a bit and my fourth layer ends up being another third layer, and then I have to do a fifth layer. So, but generally it is about 4 layers. So here I'm just fixing elements that I think are wrong. So I photographed it after layer 3 and I turned it into black and white, and I could clearly see the bits that I was off on. Some of them I already knew that I was off on them, and I just decided to leave them until the next day because I felt I'd got the most important areas of the face done. So I kind of thought, well, I'm going to leave the underneath of the neck and attempt it the next day because it's not as important as getting the face done. And I do find actually that I have a little bit of a limited shelf life for concentrating this hard, because I do find that painting takes a lot of concentration, especially when I'm on a layer 3. I mean, it's like going and sitting an exam. I remember when I was at school and I came out of these exams, these 3-hour exams, and I was exhausted. So I kind of feel like mentally I've probably only good for about 3 to 4 hours of that level of concentration. Like I can do like other stuff afterwards, but that level of concentration, I find after that I begin to lose focus, and I'm much more likely to start going a bit cavalier and rushing it and trying to get the paint on quickly and then maybe messing it up. So, everybody is different. Just because I struggle to concentrate beyond, 3 to 4 hours doesn't mean that, you will. So, we're all different. But it's knowing yourself. So that's probably another one of the reasons why I do it in this layer method. I just couldn't imagine spending, a whole day doing an alla prima painting, and unless you were doing it plein air, obviously, and then you're battling against the light to get what you're looking at. I mean, you'd probably be doing that in 2 or 3 hours anyway. So yeah, for studio work, 3 or 4 hours and I'm done. So that does me fine. So I left areas that I was intending to go back on. I hadn't done a lot of the background. You can see me putting it in. It really begins to make the horse's head sort of really begin to pop out. I still haven't really changed my brush. I do sometimes, a lot of the time really, I use the Rowney comber brushes because they're really good, but I find that they're much better for animals with long hair. When I'm doing animals with really quite short fur, flat brushes are very good. They're very expressive, but the only problem that you have to remember with flat brushes is their tendency to take the paint off as you lay it. It's very difficult to do wet on wet with flat brushes because a lot of the time they will take it off. So I'm adding white to that area in front of the horse. However, I'm not completely covering all of that in white. My mix is really it's quite a dry mix, and I want some of that lovely undercolor of the raw sienna to show through my paint to warm that up. So I'm not fiddling with that too much. I'm using that base layer that I put on my oil painting paper to sort of using that within my painting. So I'm just really sort of sorting that neck out now and moving up the area, up the side of the horse's face where I can see that area is wrong. So it is really just sort of small tweaks, just really trying to get it as close as I think I can get it without becoming just too caught up in the detail. In terms of it changing, it doesn't change so much in this layer compared to the other layers. So it really is, small adjustments. But these adjustments can be really quite time consuming. But knowing when to stop, it's a real knack, because you can really end up really fiddling and refining, and then you end up going too far, and you've pushed it too far and you've lost it. So really it is experience that tells me when to stop. But sometimes, even I go too far with it, and I think, oh no, it looked better an hour ago. Why did I do that? It is very easy to overwork a painting. You have to be very disciplined in stopping. I'm also trying to sort out my edges as well. Make sure that they're the ones that I want to be soft, and the ones that I want sort of slightly harder, I leave them. But very often I put bridging colours in between two objects. So, if I'm going from, say, on the edge of the horse's nose, for example, I've got really quite an obvious green in between the horse's muzzle and its abstracted back. And it just really helps bridge across. And also as well, it helps because we've got quite a lot of red in that brown further up. It really acts as quite an opposite colour as well. So bridging colours can play very important parts in your paintings. You just really need to think about everything that you're doing, and every stroke that you lay, and the purpose of it, and why are you doing it? What are you trying to achieve with that stroke? So it is very contrived, but at the same time you're trying to be very expressive. So it really is an absolute contradiction in term. That something that is so contrived can look so loose and expressive, but it just takes it takes practice, and you have to keep practicing at it to know how you can push it and where you can push it, and the effect of laying the paint a certain way, or how thick you can lay it. It really is. It's trial and error, and Even if you mess up a painting, you always learn something from having done that painting. So you should never think, oh no, I messed that painting up, what a waste of time, because it's never a waste of time because you will have learned something from it. So really then I think we're coming to the end of this painting. There's really not a lot more that I can do to this painting now. I'm in danger of overworking it. So it is the best time now is to stop, and I will show you a picture again of this painting. So here is the finished painting then. I hope you have found today's video useful. Please like and subscribe if you can, and check out my website sarahhallidayart.com, where you will find examples of my work and details of online classes that I run. Thank you for watching, and see you for the next one.